Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to unlock the secrets of nonverbal communication. All those subtle cues and hidden signals that speak volumes without saying a word. We've got some fascinating academic research lined up for you, and believe me, you'll be surprised by what we uncover.
We often talk about the importance of communication, but we tend to focus mainly on words. What's fascinating is how much we communicate through nonverbal means, like our body language, our tone of voice, even our facial expressions.
Exactly. It's like there's this whole other conversation happening beneath the surface, and today we're going to bring it to light. We'll be exploring how nonverbal communication plays out in a variety of settings, from healthcare to relationships, courtrooms, and even politics.
And along the way, we'll be debunking some common myths and revealing some surprising findings that might just change the way you perceive the world around you.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with healthcare. You know how sometimes you just get a feeling about a doctor even if they seem perfectly competent on paper? Well, this research confirms that nonverbal communication plays a huge role in shaping our perceptions of healthcare providers.
It's about building trust and rapport. Doctors who are attentive and responsive to their patients' nonverbal cues tend to be seen as more empathetic and trustworthy. On the other hand, those who seem distant or dismissive can leave patients feeling unheard and dissatisfied even if they provide technically sound care.
And get this, the research shows that patients often rely more on those nonverbal cues than they do on the doctor's actual words, especially when they're feeling overwhelmed or unsure about their medical situation.
Think about it. If you're feeling anxious or unwell, you're probably not processing every word the doctor says. Instead, you're picking up on their tone of voice, their facial expressions, their body language. Are they making eye contact? Are they listening attentively? These subtle cues can convey a sense of care and concern, or they can signal a lack of interest or empathy.
It's like our subconscious is constantly scanning for those nonverbal signals to assess whether or not we feel safe and cared for. But what happens when someone struggles to interpret those signals accurately? This deep dive also explores the concept of nonverbal deficits and the impact they can have on relationships.
These deficits refer to difficulties in understanding and responding to nonverbal cues. Some people might miss subtle facial expressions, misinterpret body language, or have trouble understanding the emotional tone of a conversation.
So imagine you're talking to someone and they're smiling, but their body language is tense, and closed off someone with a nonverbal deficit might miss those conflicting signals and interpret the smile as genuine, leading to misunderstandings and miscommunication.
Exactly. These misinterpretations can create friction in any relationship, but they can be particularly challenging for people who are already struggling with social anxiety or other interpersonal difficulties.
And here's where it gets really interesting. This research delves into specific groups like alcoholics and psychopaths to see how nonverbal deficits might play a role in their interpersonal challenges. For example, studies have shown that chronic alcoholics tend to overestimate the intensity of emotions and facial expressions and have difficulty decoding them accurately.
This could be due to a number of factors, including the cognitive effects of long-term alcohol abuse, as well as the social isolation and interpersonal difficulties that often accompany addiction. The research on psychopaths is a bit more complex, with some studies suggesting they might struggle to recognize certain emotions like fear or sadness, while others show they might even be better at reading people in certain contexts.
So it's not a simple black and white issue.
Mm.
There's a lot of nuance and individual variation when it comes to nonverbal communication and how it's processed. Speaking of nuance, let's move on to the courtroom, where nonverbal communication can have a huge impact on how a case unfolds. This research explores expectancy violation theory and how it plays out in legal settings.
In essence, this theory suggests that we have certain expectations for how people should behave in different situations. When those expectations are violated, it grabs our attention and influences our judgments in a courtroom. For example, jurors might be highly attuned to any nonverbal cues that seem out of place or inconsistent with the expected behavior of lawyers, witnesses, or the defendant.
Think about it. You're a juror sitting in judgment of someone you've never met before. You're trying to make sense of the evidence, weigh the arguments, and ultimately decide whether someone is innocent or guilty. It's a high-stakes situation, and every little detail can matter.
Exactly. And in that context, any nonverbal behavior that deviates from the expected norm can take on added significance. A witness who avoids eye contact might be seen as evasive or untrustworthy, even if they're telling the truth. A defendant who fidgets nervously might be perceived as guilty, even if they're innocent.
It's almost like our brains are wired to pay extra attention to those violations, even if we're not consciously aware of it. And that brings us to the million-dollar question. Can nonverbal communication help us spot a liar? I'm sure you've heard that looking away is a sure sign someone is lying, right?
Well, I'm afraid that's just a myth. There's no single Pinocchio's nose cue that definitively reveals deception. However, research has shown that certain nonverbal cues can be somewhat reliable indicators, but you have to consider them in context.
Okay, spill the beans. What kind of cues are we talking about?
Some studies have found that people who are lying might exhibit fewer hand and arm movements, longer pauses before speaking, and more speech disturbances like ums and ahs. But remember, these are just tendencies, not foolproof guarantees.
Right, because someone might be fidgety because they're nervous or uncomfortable, not necessarily because they're lying. It's all about looking at the bigger picture and considering all the factors at play. But what about those wizards of deception detection? These are the folks who seem to have a sixth sense for spotting liars. What's their secret?
These individuals consistently perform exceptionally well at lie detection tasks. They tend to have diverse life experiences, pay close attention to those fleeting microexpressions that most people miss, and use language to establish a baseline assessment of the person's typical behavior.
It's like they've developed this incredible ability to read people and pick up on the subtlest of cues. Makes you wonder if we can actually train ourselves to be better lie detectors. And speaking of masters of communication, this deep dive also analyzes how politicians use nonverbal communication to convey dominance and establish leadership.
It raises an important question. What makes a political leader charismatic and persuasive? Is it just their words, or is there something more at play?
Well, let's take Ronald Reagan as a prime example.
Yeah.
He was renowned for his captivating presence and his ability to connect with audiences, even those who didn't necessarily agree with his political views. One particular anecdote from a presidential debate highlights his mastery of nonverbal communication. So set the scene for us. What happened in that debate?
Reagan was facing a younger opponent who was trying to use Reagan's age against him, suggesting he was too old for the job when asked about this. Reagan paused, looked directly at the audience with a twinkle in his eye, and delivered that famous line, "I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience."
Oh, that's classic. Reagan, he managed to turn the tables on his opponent while simultaneously reassuring the audience that he was still sharp and capable.
Exactly. It was a brilliant combination of words and nonverbal cues. His confident posture, his warm smile, his direct eye contact, it all conveyed a sense of strength, wisdom, and humor that completely disarmed his opponent and won over the audience.
It's a perfect example of how politicians can use nonverbal communication to not only reinforce their message, but also to project a desired image and connect with voters on an emotional level. And this brings us to another fascinating area, the impact of smiling in the workplace. We've all heard that smiling can make us seem more approachable and likable. But this research reveals a more complicated side to smiling, particularly for women.
Studies have shown that women tend to smile more than men in social situations, likely influenced by societal expectations and power dynamics. But here's where it gets interesting. Research has found that women who smiled in response to sexually suggestive questions during job interviews were actually perceived as less competent and more flirtatious.
Wow, that's disturbing. It seems like they're being penalized for trying to be polite or diffuse an uncomfortable situation.
It highlights the double bind women often face in professional settings. They're expected to be warm and friendly, but not too friendly. They're expected to be assertive and competent, but not too aggressive. It's a delicate balancing act, and unfortunately, nonverbal cues like smiling can be misinterpreted and used against them.
It really underscores how important it is to be aware of the context and the potential for misinterpretations when it comes to nonverbal communication. Speaking of context, let's shift our focus to the classroom, where a teacher's nonverbal communication can have a significant impact on student learning and engagement.
We'll delve into the concept of teacher immediacy, a cluster of nonverbal behaviors that convey warmth, openness, and engagement. Think of those teachers who make eye contact, smile, use expressive gestures, and move around the classroom, creating a dynamic and inviting learning environment.
I remember having a few teachers like that. They just radiated enthusiasm and made you feel excited to learn. But did it actually translate into better learning outcomes for students?
That's where the findings get interesting. While research consistently shows that teachers who display high nonverbal immediacy receive more positive student evaluations, the link to actual academic performance is more complex.
Really, I would assume that those engaging, enthusiastic teachers would automatically lead to better student learning.
It seems intuitive, but some studies have suggested that, at least in the short term, negative nonverbal behavior might actually be more motivating for students.
Wait, are you saying that a grumpy, unapproachable teacher could be more effective?
Not necessarily. It's more about finding the right balance. Think back to your own school days. Were there times when a teacher's stern expression or demanding tone actually pushed you to work harder or pay closer attention?
Okay, I can see that sometimes a little bit of pressure can be motivating, but I'm guessing that in the long run, a teacher who creates a positive and supportive learning environment would be more beneficial overall.
That's likely the case. Teacher immediacy is still associated with many positive outcomes like increased student engagement, motivation, and a more enjoyable learning experience. It's just that the connection to cognitive performance might be more intricate than we initially thought.
It's fascinating how even seemingly straightforward aspects of communication can have such nuanced effects. This deep dive really emphasizes how much we rely on nonverbal cues to navigate our social world.
And it encourages us to be more mindful of our own nonverbal communication and how it might be interpreted by others. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the subtleties of doctor-patient interactions to the persuasive power of political leaders. We've also explored how nonverbal deficits can lead to miscommunication and relationship challenges, debunked some myths about lie detection, and uncovered the complicated truth about smiling in the workplace.
It's amazing to think how much these unspoken messages influence our perceptions, judgments, and interactions in all sorts of settings. So what does this all mean for our listeners now that we're aware of the power of these nonverbal cues? How can we use this knowledge to our advantage?
The first step is simply becoming more aware of nonverbal cues, both our own and those of others. Pay attention to body language, tone of voice, facial expressions, and even things like personal space and eye contact. These cues can provide valuable insights into people's thoughts, feelings, and intentions.
It's like learning to read between the lines of a conversation, but instead of words, we're deciphering those silent but powerful signals.
Exactly. And don't forget, you're sending out signals too. Are you projecting confidence when you walk into a room? Do you make eye contact when someone is speaking to you? These seemingly small things can have a big impact on how others perceive you.
It's a good reminder to check in with ourselves and make sure our nonverbal communication is aligned with the message we want to send. But remember, like we discussed with those wizards of deception, detection context is everything. Just because someone fidgets during a conversation doesn't automatically mean they're lying.
Mm.
They might just be nervous or uncomfortable or even excited. There's no one-size-fits-all interpretation for any nonverbal cue.
You're absolutely right. You have to take everything into account, the situation, the relationship, the person's overall demeanor. It's about piecing together all the clues to get a more complete picture.
Kind of like a detective, we've spent a lot of time talking about how to read nonverbal cues. But what about the other side of the coin? How can we use this knowledge to improve our own nonverbal communication and make sure we're sending the right signals?
It's like we've been given this incredible toolkit, but now we need to learn how to use it effectively.
Right.
And like any tool, it requires practice and awareness. Start by paying attention to your posture. Are you slouching or standing tall? Slouching can convey a lack of confidence, while standing tall can make you appear more assertive and self-assured.
I've definitely noticed that when I catch myself slouching,
Yeah.
I don't feel as confident. It's like my body language is actually affecting my mood.
Yeah, it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
Your body language can influence how others perceive you, but it can also influence how you feel about yourself. Another key element is eye contact. Making eye contact shows that you're engaged and interested in what the other person is saying. But too much eye contact can feel intense or even aggressive, so it's about finding that sweet spot.
Right, like those staring contests we used to have as kids. Not exactly the best way to build rapport.
Definitely not. And don't underestimate the power of a genuine smile. A warm, authentic smile can instantly make you more approachable and likable.
It's like a universal signal of friendliness. But what about those times when we're not feeling particularly smiley? Should we force it?
I wouldn't recommend forcing it. A fake smile is usually pretty easy to spot, and it can actually have the opposite effect, making you appear insincere or even untrustworthy. It's better to focus on other nonverbal cues, like maintaining good eye contact and an open posture.
So it's about being authentic and letting our nonverbal communication reflect our genuine feelings and intentions.
Exactly. And remember, nonverbal communication isn't just about conveying confidence or likability, it's also about conveying empathy and understanding, being attentive to the other person's nonverbal cues, mirroring their body language, and using active listening techniques can all help to create a stronger connection and foster a sense of trust.
It's like we're creating a nonverbal dialogue, sending and receiving signals that deepen our understanding of each other. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener, and I hope it's encouraged our listeners to pay closer attention to the fascinating world of nonverbal communication.
It's a world that's always there, operating beneath the surface of our conscious awareness. But once you start to notice it, you can't unsee it. It's like a whole new dimension of communication has opened up.
And with that newfound awareness comes a sense of responsibility. It's up to us to use this knowledge wisely and ethically to build bridges rather than walls, to connect rather than divide.
So the next time you're interacting with someone, take a moment to tune into their nonverbal cues. What are they telling you, and what are you communicating through your own body language, your tone of voice, your facial expressions?
It's a lifelong journey of discovery and learning. But with each step we take, we become more attuned to the subtle but powerful language of nonverbal communication.
And who knows what hidden messages we might uncover along the way.
Thanks for joining us on this fascinating exploration of nonverbal communication. Until next time, keep those eyes peeled and those ears open. The silent conversation is always happening all around us.